The house at 42, Maplewood Lane had always been quiet, the kind of suburban two-story where the hum of crickets and distant traffic made up the evening's entire soundtrack. When Olivia and her husband Daniel bought it, they called the upstairs bedroom the nursery, even though their only child was still a vague plan for some distant future. For now, they kept it empty, just cream-colored walls, a single rocking chair left by the previous owners, and a draft that somehow crept through even sealed windows. Olivia never liked lingering there. The room felt expectant, as if something already occupied it, waiting for them to notice. The first time she heard the creak of the rocking chair was on a rainy Thursday, 2 months after moving in. She had been folding laundry downstairs when a faint, rhythmic sound floated through the ceiling, slow, deliberate, like someone gently swaying back and forth. She froze, a towel clutched to her chest, and listened. The pattern was unmistakable. Forward, backward, forward. Daniel wasn't home yet. She forced herself upstairs, heart hammering. But when she opened the door, the chair was still. The air smelled faintly of lavender, a scent they didn't know W&T dinner that night. She told Daniel, laughing it off as her imagination. But he caught the unease in her voice and promised to check the windows and vents. Old houses make noise, he said, but his glance toward the ceiling betrayed a flicker of doubt. Over the next week, Olivia avoided the upstairs room. Still, sometimes, late at night, she'd hear it again, the slow creak, like a lullaby no one should be singing. Once, she thought she heard the whisper of fabric brushing against the floorboards, a faint sigh. Almost human that on Saturday, Olivia decided to confront her discomfort. She opened the nursery door in broad daylight, sunlight spilling across the bare floor. To her surprise, the chair had shifted. It was angled toward the window, a subtle but undeniable change from its original position. She searched for logical explanations. Maybe the house had settled. Maybe Daniel had moved it while dusting. Yet she couldn't shake the certainty that the chair had been turned deliberately, like someone had wanted a better view. A shiver crawled up her spine that evening. A neighbor stopped by with a plate of cookies. She was an older woman named Mrs. Whitaker, sharp-eyed and talkative. When Olivia mentioned the creaky chair in passing, Mrs. Whitaker's expression tightened. "Did they not tell you?" she asked quietly, glancing toward the stairs. "That room's been funny since the Smiths moved out. They said their little boy talked to someone in there every night." She hesitated, then added, "He called her the window lady." The nickname clung to Olivia's mind long after the conversation ended. The next morning, Megan convinced herself she'd overreacted. Cruises had security cameras, trained staff, and plenty of people around. Surely she wasn't in any real danger. Still, as she made her way to the breakfast buffet, she couldn't shake the memory of the slow, deliberate knock on her door. The corridor outside her cabin seemed longer than usual, lined with identical doors that gave no hint of the people behind them. 2 uniformed crew members passed her, speaking softly in a language she didn't recognize. As they walked by, she noticed one of them glancing over his shoulder at her. Not just a quick glance, but a long, assessing look, as though measuring her reaction. Breakfast should have been a comfort. Sunlight pouring through panoramic windows, the clatter of plates, the smell of coffee and fresh pastries. But Megan's attention kept snagging on small details. A waiter refilling water glasses seemed to be lingering at her table just a beat too long. A young couple at the next table whispered rapidly to each other and kept glancing toward the entrance. And when she finally stood to leave, she caught sight of the man from the night before, the one in the dark suit, seated alone near the back. His hands were folded neatly on the table, his plate untouched. He didn't blink when their eyes met. This time, Megan didn't wait to see if he would vanish. She turned and left. She decided to spend the afternoon exploring the ship. Deck 7 had several quiet lounges and a library that smelled faintly of old paper despite the ocean air. In the library, she struck up a brief conversation with an older British woman named Helen, who was knitting in the corner. When Megan mentioned seeing a man in a dark suit, Helen's needles paused mid-click. "Tall, thin, doesn't eat?" Helen asked, her voice low. "I've seen him too. 3 years ago, on this very ship. Different cruise. He was watching people then as well." Before Megan could ask more, another passenger entered, and Helen's demeanor instantly brightened, as if she hadn't said anything at all. That evening, Megan noticed a change in the ship's atmosphere. The wind picked up, rattling the glass doors on the outer decks. The hallways seemed dimmer, shadows stretching farther than they should. She passed a security camera mounted above the stairwell and had the sudden, irrational feeling that it wasn't connected to anything at all. Back in her cabin, she locked the door and tried to distract herself with a movie on the tiny wall-mounted TV. Halfway through, the screen flickered, briefly showing what looked like live footage of the ship's exterior decks at night. In the grainy image, a lone figure stood at the railing, unmoving, staring out at the sea. She shut off the TV, her heart pounding. The ship's engines throbbed beneath her feet, steady and relentless. But she couldn't shake the growing sense that the ocean majesty wasn't just carrying her across the Caribbean. It was carrying something else, something that didn't belong among the living. By the third night, Olivia could no longer pretend the noises were harmless. The creaks had grown louder, and the house itself seemed to breathe differently once darkness fell. She sat on the edge of her bed, wrapped in a cardigan, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Daniel had been called away for an overnight work trip, leaving her alone in the house. The upstairs felt impossibly far away, though every sound from the nursery reached her as if carried through a megaphone. Around midnight, the rocking began again, steady, deliberate, and much too loud to ignore. Heart pounding, she climbed the staircase, each step groaning beneath her weight. The hallway was dim except for a faint glow spilling under the nursery door. She hadn't left a light on in there. Her throat tightened. She pushed the door open, and the chair was moving. Not wildly, not even quickly, but undeniably rocking on its own. Her breath hitched. For the briefest moment, she thought she saw a silhouette by the window, a slender figure with graying hair tied in a bun, wearing a long dress that didn't belong to this decade. When she blinked, the chair was still, the figure gone, and only the faint lavender scent remained. Shaken, Olivia retreated downstairs and called Mrs. Whitaker, despite the late hour. The older woman answered groggily, but didn't sound surprised. "You saw her, didn't you?" she said, her voice grave. The Price woman was always watching that street. Even after she passed, people swore they caught glimpses of her in the window. Mrs. Whitaker urged Olivia to leave the nursery door shut until Daniel returned. "She doesn't like to be challenged," she added softly, as if speaking too loudly might summon something. Unable to sleep, Olivia curled up on the couch, trying to convince herself it had been a trick of the light, exhaustion playing cruel games. At some point, she must have dozed off, because she woke abruptly at 3:14 a.m. to the sound of a window sliding upward. She sat up, heart racing. The house was silent again, except for the faintest creak of the stairs, like weightless footsteps descending. She held her breath, every muscle tense, until the sound stopped. The smell of lavender drifted faintly through the living room, though the windows were still locked tight. When morning came, Olivia ventured back upstairs, sunlight doing little to soften the nursery's unease. The chair was now pressed right up against the window, its back legs slightly lifted as if caught mid-rock. On the sill rested something that hadn't been there before, an old-fashioned brass hairpin, tarnished but delicate, catching the light like a small warning. Olivia didn't touch it. Instead, she backed away, her hands trembling, and closed the door firmly. As she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, and for a split second, another face seemed to hover over her shoulder, watching with an unreadable expression. Daniel returned late the next evening, suitcase in hand, and a tired grin that vanished the moment he saw Olivia's pale face. She told him everything: the rocking chair, the brass hairpin, the silhouette at the window. Though he tried to comfort her, his casual skepticism felt forced. "Okay," he said finally, rubbing the back of his neck. "Let's go up together. We'll see what's what." He grabbed a flashlight, more for theatrics than necessity, but the way he hesitated on the first step betrayed unease. The creak of the staircase seemed louder tonight, as if the house knew it was being watched. The nursery looked deceptively ordinary in the warm glow of the overhead light. The chair sat still, though its placement near the window seemed almost accusatory. Daniel picked up the brass hairpin with a tissue, examining it closely. "This isn't modern," he said, brow furrowing. It looks like something from the 1930s or 40s. Olivia pointed out the faint lavender scent lingering in the air. Daniel set the pin down, but before leaving, he carefully angled the chair back toward the wall. Let's test this, he said. If it moves again, then we know something's off. Later, after dinner, Daniel pulled out his laptop, curiosity overtaking doubt. He dug through online archives, property records, and digitized newspapers. At first, there was nothing, just benign records of Maplewood Lane's sleepy history. But then he found a faded obituary for Eleanor Price's husband, Arthur. Buried in the article was a chilling detail. Arthur had died in a tragic fall from an upstairs window in the same house they now owned. Further digging uncovered whispers on a long-abandoned forum. Neighbors had speculated Eleanor never forgave the house, blaming its drafty, treacherous windows for taking her husband. The discovery left the couple silent. Olivia could feel the house pressing in around them, the walls heavier somehow. When Daniel suggested they box up the chair and leave it in the garage, Olivia shook her head instinctively. Don't touch it, she said. I don't think she'd like that. Her words surprised even her, but the conviction behind them was real. Daniel laughed nervously, but his gaze darted toward the ceiling. That night, they locked the nursery door and tried to sleep. Though every groan of the wood and whisper of the wind sounded deliberate, almost conversational, 2:47 a.m., Daniel sat upright in bed. He didn't know what woke him until he saw the faint glow under the nursery door, light where none should be. He grabbed the flashlight and crept upstairs, heart hammering. The nursery door, which they had locked, now stood ajar. Inside, the chair was once again turned toward the window. But there was something else, a small, sepia-toned photograph on the floor, its edges frayed. It showed a young woman, Eleanor Price, unmistakably, holding hands with a tall man near that very window. Across the back, in looping handwriting, were the words, "Meet me where the world opens up." Morning sunlight did little to chase away the unease. The photograph sat on the kitchen table between Olivia and Daniel, its faded edges curling like burnt paper. They'd barely spoken since finding it. Olivia traced the words on the back, "Meet me where the world opens up," as though deciphering them might unlock an answer. Daniel, ever the problem solver, pulled out his laptop again. If Eleanor and Arthur lived here for decades, someone must have written something about them, he said, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. But beneath his brisk tone, Olivia could see his shoulders tense. They began with the local historical society's online records. A deep dive into scanned newsletters and dusty newspaper clippings painted a picture of Eleanor. She had been Maplewood's beloved gardener, known for her lavender beds that perfumed the street each spring. But her life after Arthur's death was a different story. Neighbors wrote of her becoming reclusive, sitting by her window for hours, sometimes talking to someone who wasn't there. In one decades-old gossip column, a cryptic line stood out. Eleanor says she waits at the window for her world to open again. The words mirrored the photograph's inscription too closely to be coincidence. That afternoon, Olivia and Daniel visited the library again, determined to search deeper. A brittle, leather-bound ledger from the 1940s revealed an even darker thread. Rumors that Eleanor had once been accused, never formally, but whispered, of luring a neighborhood child into the Price home after Arthur's death. The entry was brief and signed and unconfirmed, but the implication hung heavy. Olivia shut the ledger, her skin crawling. Daniel's hand tightened around hers. "These are just old stories," he murmured, but the nervous flicker in his eyes betrayed him driving home. They passed Maplewood's small, overgrown cemetery. Olivia felt compelled to stop. Among the crooked stones, they found Eleanor's grave, a weathered marker beneath a sprawling maple tree. The lavender scent was strongest here, though no flowers grew nearby. Someone, recently, it seemed, had left an antique brass hairpin just like the one from the nursery on her headstone. Daniel pocketed it uneasily, intending to show it to Mrs. Whitaker. As they turned to leave, Olivia caught movement near the tree line, a fleeting glimpse of a figure in a long dress, too far away to be certain, but unmistakable enough to quicken her pulse. That night, the house felt heavier than ever. The nursery door was shut, yet Olivia and Daniel both sensed the rocking chair's position had changed without looking. Olivia suggested, half serious, that they should consider leaving. But when Daniel opened his phone to check nearby hotels, the screen flickered, glitched, and shut off, though the battery had been full. At the same moment, every light in the house dimmed, then steadied. From upstairs came the unmistakable sound of the chair rocking. Then a faint, melodic voice, soft and coaxing, whispered down the staircase. "Come and see where the world opens up." That night, a storm rolled over Maplewood Lane, its thunder shaking the windows as rain lashed against the siding. Olivia and Daniel sat in the living room, a single lamp burning as the power flickered. They spoke little. Every groan of the house seemed amplified. Every flicker of lightning felt like a flashbulb exposing something unseen. When the wind whistled through the eaves, Olivia thought she heard a whisper folded into the sound, faint but distinct. "Come now." Daniel glanced at her, eyes wide, as if he'd heard it too. The power finally went out, plunging them into darkness. The storm's noise was replaced by an unsettling quiet, the kind that rings in your ears. Then came the creak of the rocking chair, faint at first, then faster, more insistent. The sound wasn't confined to the nursery anymore. It echoed through the entire house, like a heartbeat. Daniel grabbed the flashlight, but when he switched it on, the beam flickered and died. In the pitch-black silence, they both heard it. Footsteps descending the staircase, slow and deliberate, the air grew heavy, pressing against their chests. Olivia clutched Daniel's arm, certain she could feel the house itself inhale. A deep, invisible breath that stirred the curtains and shifted the dust. A faint lavender scent rolled through the room. Lightning flashed, and for a fraction of a second, a tall, thin silhouette appeared at the bottom of the stairs. The storm illuminated her face, hollow-eyed, with a half-smile that was almost tender. When the darkness returned, she was gone. "Enough," Daniel whispered, his voice shaking. He took Olivia's hand and led her upstairs. Their plan was simple: grab their essentials, leave, and stay at a hotel until daylight. But when they reached the nursery, the door was wide open, and the rocking chair was still rocking, though no wind stirred and no hands moved it. On the floor, scattered like breadcrumbs, were sepia photographs they'd never seen before, images of the house at different points in its history, always with Eleanor standing near a window, her expression distant. One photograph showed the same rocking chair, but through the glass behind her, a dark figure seemed to be falling. The storm outside subsided, replaced by a deafening silence. The house seemed to hold its breath again. Then a woman's voice, soft, coaxing, unmistakably close, breathed into Olivia's ear. "It's time to open the world." The nursery window creaked as if urging itself upward. The chair rocked faster, a hypnotic rhythm. Olivia's chest tightened, torn between terror and a strange, magnetic pull. Daniel grabbed her shoulders, shaking her out of the trance. Together, they bolted from the room, the sound of the rocking chair chasing them down the stairs long after they'd slammed the front door behind them. Olivia and Daniel drove through the rain-slicked streets without speaking, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror. The storm had broken, but their nerves hadn't. Olivia clutched her seatbelt, still half expecting to see headlights appear behind them or a face in the back window. They pulled into a roadside motel 20 miles out of Maplewood, a squat, neon-lit place whose vacancy sign buzzed like an insect. Daniel checked them in while Olivia scanned the shadows outside, feeling an unshakable sense that something had followed. Inside their room, the fluorescent light hummed. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, rocking slightly, an unconscious imitation of the chair they'd fled. Daniel tried to reassure her. "We're safe. It's just an old house with drafty windows and a long history. Nothing more." But the words rang hollow. As he unpacked an overnight bag, Olivia noticed something on the nightstand, a brass hairpin, identical to the ones they'd seen in the nursery and cemetery. Her breath caught. She hadn't brought it. Neither had Daniel later. Daniel went to get ice from the machine down the hall. The room felt cavernous without him, its silence deep and absolute. Olivia sat staring at the hairpin until the neon light outside flickered, and in that split second of darkness, she glimpsed her reflection in the motel's small window. But it wasn't only her reflection. Behind her, blurred but undeniably present, stood the faint outline of a woman in a long dress, her hand hovering as if to touch Olivia's shoulder. When the light returned, the figure was gone. Daniel returned to find Olivia pale, and shaking. She told him what she'd seen, and though his first instinct was to dismiss it, the sight of the hairpin stopped him cold. "She's not bound to the house," he whispered. They sat awake for hours, the motel's hum, an occasional car passing outside the only sounds. But just past 3 a.m., the room's curtains stirred, even though the window was closed. The faint scent of lavender filled the space. And then, from the hallway, came the unmistakable sound of a rocking chair creaking. Though they were miles away from Maplewood Lane, sleep was impossible. They left before dawn, deciding to visit Mrs. Whitaker for answers they couldn't find in old newspapers. As they drove, the early morning mist clung to the road, making the world feel smaller, closer. Olivia glanced at the side mirror and froze. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw someone standing on the shoulder of the empty highway, a frail figure in a dress, her face turned toward them, watching as they sped away. The world outside the car felt suddenly unfamiliar, as though Eleanor Price had already begun to bend it to her will. The morning was unnaturally still when Olivia and Daniel returned to Maplewood. The storm had washed the streets clean, but the houses along the lane seemed subdued, shutters drawn like closed eyes. Mrs. Whitaker answered her door in a faded housecoat, her sharp gaze sweeping over them before she stepped aside. "I told you not to provoke her," she said quietly. Olivia's voice trembled. "She followed us, even at the motel." The older woman's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't ask for proof inside. Mrs. Whitaker's living room smelled of old books and chamomile tea. Shelves sagged under the weight of photo albums and journals. She motioned for them to sit, then fetched a shoebox from a high shelf. Inside were brittle clippings, yellowed photographs, and handwritten notes. Decades of neighborhood history. "Eleanor Price wasn't the first," she said, spreading the papers on her coffee table. "When I was a girl, my grandmother spoke of another woman, Margaret Vale, who watched her window for years after her husband's accident. She, too, started appearing to people, always near windows, always beckoning." Daniel scanned a faded clipping of a missing person report from 1911. It described a boy who vanished on a rainy evening, last seen near a house that had stood on Maplewood's corner long before Eleanor's. The report mentioned a neighbor hearing a woman's voice calling from an upstairs window. Another photograph showed Eleanor herself as a younger woman, her eyes fixed on a window pane that reflected not her own face, but another woman's behind her, a distortion or something worse. Olivia shivered. "It's not just her," Mrs. Whitaker said grimly. "It's the house. It's always been the house." Olivia asked why Eleanor lingered, why she would reach beyond death to follow them. Mrs. Whitaker hesitated, then whispered, "Loss leaves cracks in this world. Windows are cracks too. They're where the world can open. Eleanor lost Arthur. Maybe she thought she could bring him back. Maybe she believed she could reopen the world if she just found someone willing to follow her." She looked directly at Olivia. "You went upstairs. You looked at her chair. That's all it takes. She's chosen you now." The words settled over them like a shroud. Before they left, Mrs. Whitaker pressed a small, hand-carved wooden cross into Olivia's palm. "It's not about warding her off," she said. "It's to remind you where the world is still yours. Don't let her convince you otherwise." As they stepped back into the daylight, the wind rose suddenly, slamming Mrs. Whitaker's screen door shut with a bang. Across the street, the nursery window of their house gleamed with an unnatural brightness, as though sunlight had caught something metallic inside. But Olivia knew the house wasn't reflecting the world, it was watching. Night fell too quickly on Maplewood Lane. The sky darkened to a bruised purple as Olivia and Daniel stood outside their house, the keys cold in Daniel's hand. They had debated all afternoon. Hotel, police, even abandoning the place entirely. But Mrs. Whitaker's warning gnawed at them. "If you leave it unfinished, she'll never stop," Olivia whispered. Armed with flashlights, a crowbar, and the wooden cross, they stepped inside. The house greeted them with a damp lavender scent, stronger than ever. As if it had been waiting, they moved room to room, checking windows and corners, until they reached the nursery. The rocking chair faced the window again, perfectly aligned with the glass. The brass hairpin now rested on the sill beside the sepia photograph, as if arranged deliberately. A sudden draft shivered through the room, though the windows were shut. Daniel gripped the crowbar. "If this is about the window, maybe we break the connection," he said. Olivia nodded, clutching the cross so hard it bit into her palm. Lightning flared outside, illuminating the rocking chair as it began to move, first gently, then violently, its legs thudding against the floorboards. The window rattled as though something pressed from the other side, eager to come through. In the flicker of light, Eleanor's form materialized behind the glass, hollow-eyed, her lips curved in that faint, coaxing smile. She lifted a translucent hand, pressing her palm to the pane. Olivia gasped. The gesture wasn't menacing. It was pleading for a moment. Olivia hesitated, her fear tangled with a pang of sorrow. But then the floorboards groaned, and the room seemed to lean toward the window, the air thickening as if the house itself were drawing breath to swallow them. The smell of lavender became overpowering. "Don't listen," Daniel hissed, raising the crowbar. With a single swing, he shattered the window. Glass exploded outward, and a gust of cold air surged in, carrying the rocking chair forward as though something had been cut loose. Eleanor's figure flickered, then dissipated with the storm outside, leaving only silence. The nursery fell still. Rain spattered through the broken pane, dampening the photographs on the floor. The rocking chair stopped midsway and settled. Olivia's chest heaved, her fingers numb around the cross. Daniel lowered the crowbar, his knuckles white. Somewhere outside, thunder rumbled distantly, but inside, the house was quiet, eerily, unnaturally quiet. For the first time in days, it no longer felt as if someone were watching. Yet as they turned to leave, Olivia glanced at the cracked mirror in the hallway and caught a fleeting reflection. Eleanor Price's faint, sorrowful smile, lingering just a moment longer than it should have. Morning came without sunlight, only a pale gray glow that filtered weakly through the mist. Tyler hadn't returned. His absence hung over the camp like a weight, each of them silently wondering if they'd ever see him again, or if they wanted to. Lena's eyes were bloodshot, her voice hoarse as she repeated that the whispers had carried Tyler's voice long after he was gone. Marcus avoided her gaze, focusing instead on his camera. Alex, weary but determined, announced they would retrace their steps and find the main trail out. Yet when they turned back the way they'd come, the path seemed alien, unfamiliar, as if the woods had rearranged themselves overnight. They hiked for hours, circling trees that felt like they were repeating, landmarks vanishing as though swallowed by the fog. At one point, Marcus marked a tree with his knife, an X carved deep into the bark. But less than an hour later, they stumbled back to the same tree, the carving warped into a spiral as though someone, or something, had altered it. "We're not lost," Lena whispered. "We're trapped." Alex tried to rally them, insisting they keep moving. But his own hands shook as he folded the useless map back into his pocket. As the day wore on, Marcus grew fixated on the spirals. He stopped often to photograph them, sketching them into his notebook with an obsessive energy that unsettled the others. "They're not random," he murmured. "They're placed, almost like a map." Lena begged him to stop, but he didn't listen. At one point, she found him tracing the spirals with his finger, his eyes unfocused, lips moving as if reciting words she couldn't hear. Alex pulled him away sharply, snapping Marcus out of his trance, but the damage lingered in the silence that followed. That night, exhaustion overtook them. They pitched camp in a clearing that looked identical to the one before, though none of them admitted it. Sleep was fitful, broken by the now familiar sound of footsteps. This time, though, it wasn't just circling. The steps approached, halting just outside the tents. Lena clamped her hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. The crunch of leaves grew louder, closer, until it stopped directly in front of Alex's tent. He held his breath, every muscle locked. Then came the sound. Children's laughter, soft and high-pitched, echoing in the stillness by dawn. The fog had thinned just enough to see the clearing and the new carvings on the trees surrounding them. Not spirals this time, but crude stick-figure shapes, each one scratched deep into the bark. There were 4 of them. Lena counted twice, her stomach twisting as she realized the truth. The figures weren't random. They matched the number of hikers left. One had been crossed out with a jagged slash. Tyler. None of them spoke as they packed their things, but all of them knew. The forest was keeping track.